Welcome to the Recover You podcast. I'm Kylene.
And I'm Patrick.
We are a couple in recovery
from sex addiction
and betrayal trauma. Together, we share our story to encourage you on your journey. It's here that we talk about sex addiction, betrayal trauma, mental, emotional, and physical health, faith, and anything and everything needed to recover you to your most authentic self that God created you to be.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Recover You. It's a rainy day here in Dayton, Ohio, and it's another solo episode. My wife is busy. That's all I'll say. She's busy. No, she is very busy doing some great things. So she will hopefully be back in the coming weeks. But I am holding the torch right now. I hope I'm doing okay. But I'm having fun. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what does it mean to, and what are some questions that we can answer relative to the betrayer, or, and in this case, we'll say the husband or the boyfriend and betrayer, and how they react towards a betrayed partner. That they're working with different groups. You have single men who are going through this process, and you have men who are in relationships going through this process, and each one of those comes with its unique challenge. I will say that, and I've always said this, is that Kylene's boundaries and her support and her seeing the devastation on her face was one of the main legs of the stool in my recovery. And that's something that maybe a single person doesn't have. But on the flip side, the single person isn't dealing with the destruction of the implosion of the relationship from secrets and manipulation and things like that. So either one, has its characteristics. I'm not going to say pluses or minuses, but either one has its characteristics. So what we want to do today is go through some perspectives from the side of the addict and how they can approach the spouse or significant other through various aspects of relational healing in the context of healing from sex addiction. So I think the first question that we can ask is, what does it look like to choose individual healing? So this is compulsive behavior, addiction. These come out of a place of deep, deep wounding. It's how you have decided to numb and medicate the pain that is in your life. So, and these are just basic statements that I'm making here. So when you decide to engage in that behavior, you are not feeling the full breadth of your emotion. So, and that's what makes life interesting. That's what makes life great. So whether your spouse stays with you or not, you deserve to live into the best version of yourself, into the best version of healing that you can be. So, one of the things that it's important to say is, if you aren't engaged in full healing on your own, you may struggle on the relational side of things. It may be a rockier road on the relationship side. When you heal, you develop greater empathy. When you heal, you develop greater understanding. When you heal, you actually show up present for yourself. You can be there for people in ways that you've never been before. Just apply that context to a relationship. Do you think your spouse wants you to be quiet and not show your emotions? I'd say no. Does your spouse want you to show up and be empathetic to her, whatever she's going through, a sick parent or whatever that may be? Of course she does. So, what does it look like to choose individual healing? Individual healing contributes to relational healing. So that's what I would tell you. Don't do this for the sake of the relationship. Do this for the sake of you. And I think you will find that that your relationship will improve. Now, the one caveat I'll put out there is, you can't control other people. You may engage in a process of healing, and your spouse may decide that this is too much. Both ways, and may decide this is too much and that they can't be a party of this, and they go ahead and separate and move on. That should not stop your healing, because once again, at the very beginning of this statement, healing is greater empathy. Healing is greater depth of emotion. Healing is showing up in the world as your full self, and you are definitely worth it for that. So choosing your own individual healing is going to help relational healing, with the caveat of you just can't control everyone. So the next one is, what does it look like to express empathy to your betrayed partner? I actually was thinking a little bit about something here, but I know myself, I think I expressed empathy pretty well through this. I would say, I understand. Yes, I hurt you. But I think sometimes when you get discovered early on, before you've started to experience some healing, your own shame can start to uh, overlay their hurt and can almost dominate their hurt in a moment. And I remember, and this is paraphrasing the conversation, but Kylene was asking me questions and I dropped my eyes. I wouldn't look at her face to face. And I think she either said something like, "Look at me," or something like that, as this was going on, or as the conversation was going on. So, what does it mean to express empathy to your betrayed partner? I think the first thing is to take responsibility. Always take responsibility and understand that they're the ones that are more hurt right now than you are. You are certainly hurt from a sense of you're dealing with the scariness of discovery, which is a scary process, and you also have you're probably learning about your own hurts and wounds. And maybe you come home, you're like, "Hey, I've discovered that this series of neglect from this parent was part of the reason why this guy." Understand the shock of betrayal is an acute wound that your spouse is living into right now. You're not necessarily in the acute wounding stage. You're maybe as part of that healing from a long-term a series of wounds. But if you always take responsibility for the behavior 100% without offering any sort of qualifier. So, because once again, we're responsible for the outcome of our behaviors. We may have reasons why we did behave the way we did, and it's important to understand those things. And that's where a therapist and a coach and group and all of those things come in. But you're still responsible for the things you do. You still are. And it's important to understand that in the context of sexual betrayal, that you are responsible. And if you keep that in the back of your mind when the questions are coming at you, when let's say the stare downs are happening or whatever that is, if you understand it's you're the one that hurt them. And it's your job to create a safe condition, create a safe person out of yourself that can allow your spouse or significant other to heal. The third question would be, what if they're expressing empathy to you? Now, that's a wonderful thing if that happens. That really is a wonderful thing. And I can speak to it here. Kylene was great. I remember we had set up a 90-day calendar to check the days off into sobriety. And I remember feeling like a little kid because we walked into the bathroom and I checked off the first day and she was like, "Yay, good job." And I was like, "Oh my goodness, yay, good job." Like one day in. And it was just, it felt foolish, but she did it. And this is a woman that I had just told hours prior that I had this, and of course, she didn't know the full extent of the story yet because I just wasn't there yet, but there was some bad things coming out. There was some things that she was just not understanding, and it was crushing her. But she was, I think the big distinction there, and this could go for the betrayed spouse, is what's the role of a spouse or one side of the relationship, and what's the role of somebody who has empathy towards somebody else and is supportive. So let's say a friend. So Kylene, just because she helped me check off one day of sobriety, she wasn't like, "Well, bygones are bygones," and then we just went on a nice anniversary vacation like right after that. Like there was still a lot of relational work. We still had to get through the processes that we had to get through. It was months and years and things like that from a relationship standpoint. But the point is she was being kind and she was encouraging me through this process. So what do you do if your spouse does that? I think you got to respect it. I think you have to respect the nature, the double-sidedness of that challenge for them, that it's not always easy, and you need to honor it. Don't stop doing your work because your spouse has been incredibly encouraging of you over 30, 60, 90 days, 120 days. Don't be like, "Well, I just stopped going to group because it sounds like you and I are doing well." Remember, 3 to 5 years is the healing arc for you. And if you decide to uncouple yourself from that train early on, just because your wife or your significant others is praising you or saying, "Hey, I'm really proud of the work you're doing," that dishonors her efforts back to you, and it dishonors the work that you're doing for yourself. So stay the course, stay out there, make sure that you're moving yourself along and re-engaging where you need to, and making sure that you keep pressing forward. What if they're angry and defensive? The thing I would tell you is, well, grow up. It's all part of it. Sometimes I know in the Conquer series, they talk about putting on your big boy pants. And so it is what it is. When you hurt people, they're going to be angry with you. If you come home and go, hey, look, I got 2 weeks in, and they go, well, good for you. That is what it is. It really is what it is. Remembering that you hurt them. It's important to talk about caveats and things like that. I would think if you're 10 years on and you guys have really, really done well, and there's still a lot of negativity, that could mean something greater from a relational standpoint. But I tell you, within that 3 to 5 years, your motivation has to be intrinsic to you. It has to come out of your own desire to heal. So if they're angry, I think we told the story about how we went to dinner at the 90 days and we sat down, and Kylene had handed me a coin, right? So here's the double-sidedness of this. It handed me a 90-day coin. It was really cool with a nice little card. And then she glared at me at dinner. And so it was funny, but it shows the nature of these things. So she was being friendly. She understood in her own way how hard this was for me to kind of get to this point and do the work. She recognized what I was doing, and she was very hurt by it and felt foolish. And going through the process of putting makeup on to go to dinner with me felt like she couldn't make sense of that. Like, why was she doing that? Why did she care? Why would I deserve to be able to sit with her with makeup on and all of those things? So it was just a really, really hard moment for her. And I remember I was like, well, here we are. This is awkward. But we got through it, and we got through it because I didn't react. I was humble in that moment. And I would say it was probably about 5-10 minutes, and it passed. And I think we drove away and we were holding hands. So yeah, if you're patient with the process and don't overreact, and understand that this is just what it is to be, I hate to say it, but to be in trouble. You're in trouble because of what you did. And it's not, this is not, in a lot of cases with a lot of spouses, this is not the parent that lets you off the hook just because you say you're sorry, right? You should say you're sorry, but it's going to take a lot of time to rebuild that trust ladder, work through the traumatic triggers that have been created by your behavior. It can take years. One other thing that if you deal with the anger, what you want to really try to do is not intentionally contribute to it. So here's a good example. You start to move into sobriety, and this is hard because the twists and turns of healing are always a little bit interesting. So here would be a good example. You all agreed that you would not turn on the TV with her out of the house. You decide one day that you're just going to watch something that has no problems to it. It's a sporting event or something like that. She comes home and says, hey, we said that you weren't going to turn the TV on. And you go, I was just watching sports. I'm 90 days into recovery. That's an example where it's not really about the sports. It's the fact that you blew through and agreed upon agreement with the two of you as to how you were going to deal with technology. That is more hurtful to her than what you were watching. So what that shows is a lack of empathy towards her, shows a lack of empathy towards the feelings that she's feeling. Because how does she know? She gets home and she's like, wait, what's happened? What else are you blowing through? What else is going on? If I can't trust you, I thought we're trying to rebuild trust here. So the point with that is to really, if there's been boundaries that have been put down, if there is left and right limits that have been put down, stick to those things as best you can. If you make a mistake, sometimes it happens. I get it because we're not perfect, but own up to it. Don't get defensive on it. If there was a miscommunication, you didn't quite understand maybe what was happening, and because not every situation is always black and white, but where it can be, you should be very black and white. Is it the betrayed partner's job to validate your feelings and celebrate your sobriety? What about their trauma? So, we talked about this a little bit earlier, the friend versus spouse. So hopefully the spouse can show up for you in a friend way as you move through this, but it's not their requirement. It's not their requirement to do that. The bar, and Kylene set a really high bar for me to be in a relationship with her. And I violated that bar. And I manipulated the truth. She had asked me what kind of behavior I was engaged in. This was before everything came out. I minimized it. I glanced around it. And there were reasons. I was trying to solve it on my own, blah, 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 all that stuff. But the point of the matter is she didn't know the truth. So her bar was she wanted to know the truth. And so we went through a process where she would learn the truth. And so it's not her job to validate your feelings. The one thing I will say about Kylene is she was very curious. And I know not every relationship was this way, but she was very curious. Hey, what did you learn in therapy? What did you learn in group? And so I always felt very safe to come to her and say, hey, these are my 10 worst moments. This is what I learned. I never knew this was a 10 worst moment, but this is what I learned about it. And, as you're going through sometimes these little things that maybe 3 to 5 years later aren't really emotional things. At that moment, they're very emotional. And because you're really learning a lot about yourself. You're learning about the hurts that come into your life. So I was very fortunate in that sense that Kylene was very, very curious about that and wanted to be part of that. There were times when she would get, maybe, and I could see it on her face. Like I would say something and then I could sense her get sad, and it would be one of these things. She would just get sad about the situation. We would be talking and she would just get sad and cry and maybe have an intrusive thought or something relative to what my behavior had been. And so her emotions could shift very quickly. And so there were times when it was like, well, should I bring this up to her or whatever as we talk about it? But on balance, through the last 3.5 years, she's always been very open for me. That's not always going to be the case for you. You may get home and your spouse says, I don't care. I don't want to hear what you talked about in therapy, because she's still angry. Or maybe her healing arc is not in a spot yet where she can deal with that information. And sometimes that happens. Let's say you both are in therapy or seeing a coach or whatever, and you're learning different things at different paces. It's okay. Once again, would it be nice if your spouse could encourage you and be there for you? Yes, but it's not a requirement. And your healing should not be based upon her engaging in encouraging work. There's such a thing as personal integrity that we didn't have. I mean, that's just basically what happens is when you engage in this behavior, you lack personal integrity. And I'm not saying that to shame anybody, but that's just what happens. You engage in things in your private life that maybe you don't want people to see, or in behaviors that just are harmful. And so you lack personal integrity. Find a way to get your personal integrity back. And that should be enough to help you through this process. So is it once again, is it nice? Absolutely. But their level of trauma, what they have discovered, and the truth of what is starting to come out to them, it's devastating for them. And you got to keep that in mind as you move through this. They don't want to, you're not a puppy being trained. You're a grown up who the expectation was that you would do the right thing. They find out that it wasn't. They're willing to work with you while you go through this, but don't expect a lollipop every time you turn around. What if the wife doesn't know everything? At what point does not telling her because she isn't asking cross the line of allowing her to live a life she doesn't know she's living? So this is an interesting question, because with the full therapeutic disclosure backed up by a polygraph, that normally handles everything about telling the truth. So if you go through a structured process like that, where you're writing everything down, or the spouse says, I want to know everything that's happened sexually since we met, or whatever that standard is that they do, and you get through that process. And once you get through that process, the both of you start to heal from that. So, that's a hard process. We've talked about that before. It's embarrassing for both of you. It's gut-wrenching, it's scary, it's all of those things, but it resets the truth level in the relationship. And that is a really important bedrock to start from, that you can argue you should have started from at the point of meeting. But for whatever reasons you're not there, you're trying to reset that. Very effective situation. There are some spouses and significant others that I've had experience with that will say, well, you just get in group, I don't want to know anything about it. And so this is the thing that I feel is very important. If you go to that spouse and say, I've done some really, really bad things, and I will tell you everything. I will literally tell you everything. And I don't think you understand the full scope of what I have done. And that spouse says, don't tell me, but you are really leading and you're like, oh, trust me, it's not good. And like really just being open and honest and saying, hey, this is what, the truth is much more devastating than you can probably imagine, and all of these things. And that spouse still says, I don't want to hear it. Then maybe okay. But more often than not, what happens is you start, because denial is a big part of this. Hey, I did some bad things. She thinks it's pornography, but in your mind, it's affair. So she goes, I don't want to hear about it. And she's thinking it's just pornography, or maybe pornography, quote unquote, just pornography. And you're like, good, I'm off the hook. So she has no idea. I remember this when I think what shocked me through our own journey was, because we lived in that world, or I lived in that world, I knew the terminology, I knew the extent, I knew how everything happened, but Kylene knew nothing of it. All she knew, as somebody who had never been involved in it all, was maybe she had heard things, and I think she said this before, she had no idea what cybersex was, right? But I certainly did. And so more often than not, your spouse is not going to understand the full details, not going to understand anything, not going to understand that there's an app that allows you to go have affairs, is not going to understand what you did on business trips, is not going to understand all of those things that we hear out there. So this is what I'll say, and it kind of goes back to my previous point about living in integrity. You owe it to that spouse. If they're going to stay with you, you owe it to them that they hear the whole truth. And it may be a hard thing, and you might have to press into that, and it may take you a while to get to the point where you can do it, and everything. But if you get discovered early on, and within 30 days your spouse agrees that you don't have to tell her, you are not equipped to fully understand yet what she knows and doesn't know, and what you're willing to say. So I know that one of the things that Conquer says is, if you just go into the program and you're not discovered, they actually will say, don't say anything to your wife for 6 months. And the part of the reason they say that, and you can agree or disagree with that, but part of the reason they say that is, after 6 months of healing, what you're going to tell your spouse is going to be much different than what you would say at month one, because you're qualifying in month one. Maybe you're dancing around it. You're trying to cover things up. Maybe by month 6, you're so full of conviction and you're trying to live into integrity, and you're going to tell the whole thing. So the one thing and I've said this to people before, if you are going to tell your wife, what I would recommend is support her through that process. Maybe you have a friend on call, or one of her friends that you can have standing by, or something like that, because it's not going to be a pleasant conversation. They never are. And if they are, I'd always wonder, like, what's going on there? But they are never pleasant conversations, and they shouldn't be, because it's about manipulation, deceit, and betrayal, and all of these different things. So, if the spouse tells you, no, I don't want to know, you go get healing, all I would tell you is, you need to look yourself in the mirror and say, hey, is this the right thing to do by this person who I love, by this person who is maybe encouraging me through this process by this person that maybe I call them my best friend on Facebook, by this person who has given me children and that we vacation together and all of those things. Is that what personal integrity is? That what you would want your friends to tell you? Would you want if the roles were reversed, would you accept that as or would you want to know more? So that's what I'll say on that. The spouse doesn't deserve to live in a lack of truth. And so that's not good for the relationship. And I'll tell you, your secrets make you sick. So we've said that over and over. Secrets make a relationship sick. And it's been my experience that no matter what that secret is, if you approach it from a point of healing and you keep doing your work, miracles do happen in relationships. What is the betrayed partner really looking for? Does demanding affirmation or belittling them for asking questions help that or hinder that? Yeah, I would say demanding affirmation or belittling them for questions is never really a good operating premise in any relationship under any circumstance. So I think, and then you throw in this, triggers are going to come up, and triggers will come up at weird times. I know Kylene and I have been in situations where we have been super, super healthy, and something will surprise us out of the blue. It won't trigger me, but it might trigger her. And maybe you just have to kind of answer it. You just have to, a lot of times they settle down very quickly. If you get defensive right off the bat, then maybe the spouse who had the trigger is like, why are you so defensive? But if you just turn and say, hey, how can I show up for you right now in this trigger? I know one of the things that can be a little bit difficult, and maybe this is not a trigger for everybody, is shows, TV shows. There are things in TV shows that, like, under normal circumstances are not triggering, but can be triggering at a various point. I know we've had issues where, let's say, like, I don't know, like a beach scene or something like that. Like, there'll be times I'll be tired or whatever, and I'm kind of watching the scene to try to, like, be prepared, but it never really seems to get that bad. But to Kylene, it got bad, right? Or whatever, or something. And she may say, hey, how come you didn't look away? And I'm like, I didn't think there was anything bad there. And so that's just an example of, you're bracketing. You're kind of going through some situations, and if I react defensively and say she's just got to get over it, that doesn't make her feel safe and loved. But if I say, hey, I'm sorry about that, I was just thinking that it was okay, then she hears that from you, and then it's really all right. You kind of move on. And there's a lot of situations, maybe, and sometimes there's situations that maybe you stop doing. If you all took vacations in Vegas, maybe Vegas is not a vacation spot anymore. Or if it is, maybe it's one of those things that you stay in the outskirts in an Airbnb, and you take a taxi into the show and immediately get in the taxi and leave. There's all kinds of ways to solve the things that maybe are triggering. And here's the thing: if you have betrayed your significant other, and you want to stay with them, and you've made efforts to stay with them, then you work on things. You know what I mean? Like, you try to work things out so people feel as safe as they can. So, I think, once again, what's the integrity that you're showing up with? Do you want to become a safe person again? Or do you want to just be the person who lacked empathy, but just doesn't engage in the behavior anymore? How do you want to show up in the relationship? When should an addict say, it's been so many years, why are you asking me this? I would generally say never. I can't think of a time when you would ever say that. I can say that I do understand if it goes through your head. So if you're sitting somewhere and something comes up and you go, oh boy, here we go again. Like, I get that. Like, I understand that, because sometimes these things will catch you off guard. The further into recovery that you go, you'll be like, why is this triggering? But don't ever say, hey, how long is this going to go on? And I think, it's been my experience in our relationship that if I approach a boundary or something like that in a proactive way ahead of time, and we talk through it, it actually kind of helps the situation. And then we can have a good discussion about concerns or whatever that may be. And we use that example of the TV in the hotel room watching, like, a sporting event if you're traveling. If you just do it, well, even though you didn't act out and you're whatever, it violates a lot of the preset conditions that were there. But if you pick up the phone and call, number one, the spouse goes, wow, they actually thought enough of me to pick up the phone and call me, talk to me about what was going on. I still have a lot of concerns. And okay, what are those concerns? Let's walk through them. Let's kind of break them down. Well, I don't know what's there on the phone or on the TV. I don't know if they have pornographic movies in the thing. Okay, this is what I'll do. When I turn on the TV in the room, I will videotape that, and you can see the menu, and I'll send that to you, that video to you. And if there's something there, then we know we'll turn it back off. I won't watch the show. So there's a lot of ways that you can solve this stuff. But I tell you, it gets harder and harder to solve them when you are overreactive and defensive. So I think there's a kind of a distinction in this one too. There's the disclosure questions that come up through, responding to your spouse as you're moving through disclosure, in a negative way is really, really dumb. I hate to say that. That's really, really dumb, because you haven't gotten through that point yet where you're being open and honest. 3, 4, 5 years down the road, if it surprises you, and this is what I'll tell you too, we're not perfect. We're not, we all go through stressors at work and stressors with our children, and maybe we're not feeling well or whatever that is. But if you do make a mistake, it's okay. Just acknowledge it. Say, hey, I'm sorry. I might have overreacted here. I apologize. I was thinking about something else. Versus triggers that she may have for the rest of your marriage. She may have those for the rest of her life. She may still get triggered on occasion if something comes up on the TV, or it may just be something that happens. A word may hit and it might trigger her. And, that's the way it goes. It just is the way it goes. You got to remember that betrayal trauma is one of the most significant traumas that somebody can suffer from. And it stays with them for a long time. I was actually thinking about this the other day. I was actually betrayed in previous relationships. And those, and I didn't necessarily go through and figure out that I had betrayal trauma and stuff until I was going through healing from this. And it's interesting. You'll have a little trigger. And I had one the other day. Kylene was going to hang out with some of the cast members, and I got a little bit of a weird feeling. And so that's a trigger from my previous experience. And it's interesting because she's never done anything that has caused me any problem in the relationship. And she's texting me like the whole time. She's like sending me clips, and she's communicating me. So it would be like, well, why would she, go and do something? But that's just a trigger. So it's really okay. I knew what it was. It was all right. I worked through it. I went to bed. I was fine. So it's just know that the triggers can come up, and they can come up for a long time. Just be prepared. And when they do, try to do your best to be as empathetic as you can be. How can I focus on recovery and be a good husband? I think this comes down to, what identity you want to hold. And we've talked about this before. A recovered husband is empathetic, shows up, is present, or you can be reactive, you can be defensive, you can be all of those things. So I think, if you focus on healing yourself, if you focus on working through the disclosure elements, we talked about getting the truth out there. There's a great book that we've mentioned before called Help Her Heal by Carol Jurgensen Sheets. And it's just a great book. It teaches you how to react. It actually shows you how to react in these defensive situations, and in turn, it actually helps you recover as well. So it's one of these things. It's not just like a singular purpose behind it. It helps you to show up, because a lot of times we don't know how to show up in these situations. And so it's, and I've said this before, but I remember, doing things like maintain eye contact, telling myself, maintain eye contact, ask what I can do to help. If she says, I don't want to see you right now, don't stay there, because she just clearly stated what she wanted. But it's okay for you to go, okay, but I'm going to be back in 15 minutes, or I'm going to be back in an hour to see how you're doing. Like, it's okay to do those things. She actually wants you to do that. She wants you to fight for your relationship. Now, she doesn't want you to be a stalker and show up and like, get out of my room. I told you to get out. She just wants you to, she wants you to be present and to not run away. One of the worst things you can do is just run away in a relationship. So, just focus on ways to continue your healing. So thank you for listening today, and we will talk to you next time.
Woohoo! If you're listening to this, it means you've made it through an entire episode. Part of recovery is spending time engaging in healing and self-growth activities. We are thankful that you chose our podcast to be one of those activities today. Make sure you reward yourself for that accomplishment. If you've enjoyed this episode or this podcast, we would love to hear from you. Please take just a few moments to leave a rating and review, letting us know your experience with Recover You. We not only love hearing how these episodes are helpful, but ratings and reviews help others just like you who are searching for recovery information and support find the podcast too. We can't wait to hear from you. See you next week.